Hi, everyone. My name is Rob, and I wanted to take this time to share a testimony of mine, a personal experience, something that happened to me about 30 some years ago. It's taken me quite some time to share the experience with anyone. Initially, I felt it was very personal. I wasn't sure how to even go about, sharing my story until I really actually started to, follow the Bible and until I became a Christian. So anyway, um, so back in 1990, I was about, I want to say 10 or 11 years old, and my grandmother had passed away a year prior. So I was in my room one day, and I wasn't feeling really well. I had a temperature, and the reason I know is because my mom came in and she had told me that my temperature was 105.5, and so at the time I had told her that I was gonna lay down. So I went to my room and I fell asleep. And the moment I fell asleep, um, I remember being back at the same hospital where my grandmother had passed away, and I was walking down this long hall that I used to walk through before I'd head to her room. And before I got to the very end of the hallway, off to my right, where there stood a soda machine, was now this escalator. And it just kind of went straight up through the ceiling. And I had thought that was really strange. I'd never seen the escalator before, and the soda machine was no longer there. So I thought that was just the weirdest thing ever. And so I decided that I was gonna, try to get on this escalator. So upon, getting near to the escalator, I started to kind of look around, and I checked the escalator out to see how it was functioning or how it was even possible that it was heading straight through the ceiling wall. And I really couldn't figure it out. So eventually I got on the escalator, and I headed all the way up to the very top. And before I got to the last step, I put my hand out because I was worried that I was gonna, crash into the ceiling. And so I had told myself that if I did, I would just jump off. And as I put my hand up, the next thing I knew, my hand started passing through the ceiling wall. And I just kept going up and up until I kind of looked back, and I could see parts of the hospital, and I could see people still working and going about their business. And it was like this translucent thin veil that I could see through. And so anyway, I'm heading all the way up to the top, and I thought I was just going to head up to the next floor of the hospital, but instead I ended up in this beautiful place. It had green rolling hills, it had beautiful flowers, and it was just a magnificent sight. I've never seen anything so vivid in my life. And the weirdest thing was, while I was in this, paradise or wherever I was at, I I could see a lot clearer. I used to wear glasses, so I could see a lot clearer. My senses were just heightened times, 1,000, and everything was just clear to me. It was almost as if I kind of didn't question things as much as I did here on Earth. And so, while I was in this place, I was looking around. I looked up at the sky. It kept changing colors from turquoise to purple to pink. And, I was just in awe by everything I had witnessed and seen. And so I decided, I was going to, just kind of walk around to, you know, discover this new place. And as I kind of looked straight ahead of me, about 30 feet away, there was this very bright light, and it just kept coming closer and closer to me. And in many ways, I wasn't fearful of it at all. I wasn't scared. As this light got closer to me, I felt as if I felt as if I was more connected to the light more than anything. And I felt this, overwhelming sense of warmth and peace that just came over me. And I just wanted to be, part of that light. And finally, as the light got, literally right in front of me, I saw an image, and it looked like it was a person, but I couldn't see, the person's face. And initially I thought, this has got to be, an angel or something spiritual. So anyway, I looked up, and when I looked up, I could see this bright light. It kind of looked like the sun, but a thousand times brighter. And like I said, it didn't hurt me, but I couldn't really see the details of the person's face or the being's face. And so anyway, all of a sudden I hear this audible voice, but I kind of hear it through my mind. I didn't see him speak it, obviously, because I couldn't see his mouth move, because I couldn't see his face at all. But he just called me by name, and he said, Robert. He said, do you know who I am? And it was like every single cell in my body, everything within me knew exactly who he was. My grandmother, as I said before, she had passed away. She was very religious and spiritual, and she would read the Bible to me every morning before she'd, start her day. So, she'd get the coffee kettle going, and I would wake up, and that was kind of my wake-up call. But anyway, she would read the Bible to me, and she spoke mostly Spanish, and she could speak English, but not too well. And so she would try to translate, the meaning of the passage or whatever story she was reading. So she did that pretty much every morning. And so anyway, when I saw this being of light, I just immediately knew. When he asked me, Robert, do you know who I am? I said, yes. I said, you're the Son of God. And the weirdest thing was he kind of laughed or giggled, and I thought, he laughed, but it was clear to me that it was only because he knew that I was able to reveal who he was. Like, I was able to recognize him, because I had, been taught about, who Jesus was long ago. And so anyway, next thing I knew, he grabbed my hand. He took my right hand, and we started walking. And I began walking with Jesus, and I just felt, again, this peace, this love. And I just, I can't even explain with human words, but it was like the love that I never could ever achieve here on earth was finally possible, here in, this paradise, next to, the creator of the world. And so as we were walking, I looked down at the ground, and these flowers were just swaying from left to right, and everything seemed to be praising, God. It seemed like, wherever we would pass by, even the grass, the needles of grass would be swaying and praising, Christ. And so, it was just amazing. And the next thing I knew is we stopped, and all of a sudden he pointed to the left, and to the left of me, which I guess I didn't bother to notice, because I was so, engulfed in his love, and I didn't really pay attention to what was around me. But he pointed to the left, and there stood this temple. And this temple, it looked like it was made out of limestone, and I don't know how I knew that, but it was just, like I said, there was just things I felt like I knew, and I didn't really question. And so he pointed to the left without saying anything, and it was like I knew already what he wanted me to do. And so when he pointed, I looked to the left, and I did exactly what he had commanded me to do. And it was like within a blink of an eye, I was catapulted to the front door of this temple. And as I neared the temple door, it opened automatically on its own. And so kind of, I guess you could say, I kind of floated inward towards, the doors. And as they opened, I walked in, and there I could see this huge rectangular shaped room. And it had all these nicely decorated tables with, the cutlery and napkins and fine wine glasses were set out. And so it looked really, really elegant, and it was just nicely, decorated. It was kind of like a banquet, or, a nice dinner of some kind. And so throughout the room, I was just scanning the entire room, and I noticed that everybody was mingling and socializing outside of this, perimeter, outside of this rectangular shaped dining area. And I didn't understand that, but it was like nobody was sitting, nobody was, in that area. They were all kind of on the outskirts of that perimeter. And so I noticed tons of people talking with one another, smiling and laughing. And it was like this huge gathering, and it felt like it was like this huge long-awaited reunion that I was supposed to, be at. And finally, that day had come that, I was actually there and I was present with everybody. And so from the corner of my eye and off to the left, I saw this image of somebody that I recognized immediately. And so as I turned my head, there was my grandmother. She was right there mingling and talking with my aunt, Alice, who had passed away 7 months after my grandma passed away. And so immediately I rushed over to give her a hug, and I embraced her. And I just, was greeted by so many people that I knew somehow they were part of my, family line. Somewhere down the road, they were my ancestors, part of my family lineage. And so I just was greeted by so many people. And I met my grandmother's mom, which I never formally met. She had passed away before I could even remember. So, and then I met, so many people that I can't even tell you. It was like, this huge family reunion. And that's all I can really, explain it. It was just this huge family gathering. And so all of a sudden, this little girl walks up to me. She looks about 6 or 7, and she gives me this big hug. And she tells me we're cousins, and I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't, say, "Oh, I don't recognize you." I just, kind of, just agreed and validated her. And so I gave her a hug, and then she said goodbye. And then after that, my grandmother walked up to me, and she said, Robert, she said, Jesus wants to talk with you again. And so when she said those words, immediately I was, literally catapulted outside of the temple, and I was face to face once again with Jesus Christ. And like I said, I gladly just embraced him, and he grabbed me by the hand again, and we walked. And then he asked me the strangest thing. He said, what's the one thing you've always wanted to do on earth but never could achieve or do? And, being that I was only about 10 years old, I know it sounds crazy, but I said, I wish I could fly. I didn't tell him that. It was like I thought it in my mind, and sure enough, we were in the sky shortly after. And, there was all these beautiful waterfalls, and we were like in, the heavens, and I could see birds and of all kinds. And he had me by the hand, and the whole way through he was smiling, and he was just laughing. And I just felt such a peace and joy. I like I said, I just didn't want to, leave that blissful moment. I wanted to stay there forever. And shortly after, we came down to the ground again, and he embraced me once more. And then Jesus, he said, you got to go back. It's not your time. And I wish I could tell you that I felt grief or sadness when he said those words, but I was in the presence of the Son of God, so I there was no feelings of grief or sadness around him. It was all peace and joy, and so it was kind of like I just obeyed and hearkened unto what he had said to me. So he told me I could say goodbye, and I went back into the temple again, where my grandmother was at. I was again just quickly. I was there within minutes. That's all I can really say. And so when I was back in the room, it was like everybody knew that it was time for me to go back, because they were all kind of lined up, ready to bid me farewell. And they started giving me hugs and embracing me. And I asked my grandmother. I said, I don't want to go back. And she said, it's not your time. You have to go back. Jesus has a lot more for you to do. And the last thing I remember her saying was, just trust in him. And when she said those words, I gave her a big hug, and I was back outside the temple. And then Jesus, I was right in front of him again, and he had me by both hands this time, and he said, I'll never leave you. And when he said those words, before I could even say anything or respond, I was back on this escalator, and only it was moving twice as fast. And when I got on this escalator, I was heading straight down, and I felt like it was just moving incredibly fast. And I could see the little veil, the translucent veil that I had seen, initially once I had entered this paradise. And so as I was heading down, I could see people again working, and I could see the hospital floor, and I could see some of the patient rooms. And finally I got to the other side of this dimension, and I was back on Earth. And as I got to the last step, I tried to turn around and run the opposite way, because I didn't want to come back. I really didn't. And so I started running as fast as I could, and it just felt so taxing on me. I couldn't muster up enough speed or energy to get to the very top. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. And then when it abruptly stopped, I jumped off, and I wanted to look around the back of it to see how this thing functioned. And then it just slowly started to kind of disappear. And when it disappeared, I felt really sad, and I was kind of heartbroken. And so I went ahead and, I thought, well, maybe I could go back to my grandmother's room and she'll be there. And, I went back to her room, and obviously there was no one there anymore. And there was actually someone in her bed already. So, it really just, it broke my heart. And so I walked out, and as I walked out of the room, I was walking towards the hallway, and I could see this bright light again just coming in through these big windows. And something just told me that, it was going to be okay, that I knew that, that I was at peace with where she was at, and that I got to, say goodbye to her. And next thing I knew, I woke up, and my mom was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I felt really warm, and I went to reach for my forehead because I felt something damp. And my mom had a damp cloth on my forehead, and I felt really hot still, and I could feel the beads of sweat on my head. And so I took the damp towel off my head, and I sat up. And then my mom, she was kind of, she had her back towards me, and while she was on the phone, and I could hear her talking with somebody, and I couldn't make out who she was talking with because I was still a little disoriented. But for the most part, I heard her say something like, I'm going to give him some Tylenol. So I think she was on the phone with, the nurse or somebody. And my mom basically turns around and she felt the bed move, and I sat up, and she just kind of had this puzzled look on her face, and she was kind of a little scared, it looked like. And I remember her saying, like, I tried waking you, and you weren't responding, so I got scared, and so I called the nurse, or I was going to call the ambulance, she said. And so anyway, when she sat me up, I drank some water. She'd give me a little bit of water, and she gave me some Tylenol. And when she gave me the Tylenol, I want to say within like 3 or 4 minutes, I immediately started to feel better, And so anyway, I then told my mom. I said, Mom, uh, I saw Grandma. And she said, what? She couldn't believe what she had just heard. And she's like, what do you mean you saw Grandma? I said, I was in heaven or paradise. And I said, and I saw Grandma. And I saw my Aunt Alice, and I saw a few other people there. And then she started asking me like what they looked like. And I had told her that, obviously when my grandmother passed away, she was in her late 60s, and she looked to be about, early 30s. And so did my aunt. Everybody looked to be really youthful and young. And so I'd also told her about the little girl I had seen. And my mom said, well, what did she look like? And I said, well, she said she was my cousin, and she looked kind of like, and I kind of paused for a little bit, and then she goes like, who? And right when she said those words, it was like it just automatically, a light bulb came on, and I remembered her features. And I said, she looked like my aunt, and Angie. And so when I said those words, my mom looked at me, and she's like, but you don't have a 6 or 7 year old cousin that died. And I just couldn't make sense of it. And then minutes later, my mom comes back, and she goes, well, your aunt had a baby that died 3 days after it was born. And the hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up, and I just was really shocked, because I remember how she looked. She resembled my aunt a lot, just a smaller version. And when she said those words, I thought, well, when my cousin died, she was a baby. She looked to be about 6 or 7. So I started to really wonder if I really saw, my aunt's child or not. So anyway, there's a lot more to my story. But I thought I'd just share my testimony, so that maybe those, again, who question whether there is, life after death. I want to say that for me, I got to experience a glimpse of it. But I know it's not the heaven that's, spoken of in the Bible. I know that heaven, the new earth that's spoken of in Revelations, is still yet to come. And that's something I learned over time after I started to research and try to figure out, what I saw in this, vision, or, I don't know if it was a vision or a dream, but I know definitely that it was real. Most of my dreams don't make any sense, and this was far from a dream. So, yeah, that's my testimony. And I thought I'd share, my story. I hope that it can in some way encourage or enlighten someone, and give them some peace. And I just pray that, you would all come to know that Jesus Christ is real. And, you have an opportunity right now, while you're alive, to accept him as your Savior. And if this place doesn't exist, well, you have nothing to lose. But if it does, then you have everything to gain. God bless you all. I love you, and may the Lord Jesus Christ continually dwell in each and every one of you.